Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to be completing the square in this hyperbola, and so let's get into it. All right, so let's go over what are the steps for completing the square in a hyperbola, and as I go through each step, I'm also going to do that step as well. So the first step is to take a look at the terms with x or x squared and the terms with y or y squared separately. And we're going to, out of each of these, looking at these as separate, we're going to be looking at the leading coefficient and common factoring it out. And that's going to happen whether or not that number is an actual factor of each term. Now, in this case, it is going to be for both of them, but even if it isn't, we're still going to factor it out. And that does differ a little bit from how we would normally actually factor. So I'm going to do that. For the first term, or for the x terms, I notice that the leading coefficient is -2. So I'm going to common factor out -2. So I'm going to get -2 times x squared minus, plus 8x. And some people might be saying, oh, but couldn't we also factor out an x? And yes, you're right. If our goal here was to actually completely, fully common factor this, then yes, we would also common factor out an x, but that's not our goal here. Our goal here is specifically to just common factor out the leading coefficient in this step. Next, we're going to do the same thing with the leading coefficient for the y term. So we're going to factor out 5 from 5y squared, and we're also going to factor that out from 20y, from -20y. Okay, so that's our first step done. The next step is we are going to take the non-leading coefficient of each of each of these that are resulting, and we're going to divide it by 2 and then square it. Okay, so I'm going to highlight which numbers we have to do that to. So we have to do that to 8 because that is the non-leading coefficient of what we have now that we have done that factoring. And same with -4. So let's first do it with 8. We have to divide it by 2 and then square it. So 8 divided by 2 squared is equal to 4 squared, which is equal to 16. That means we need to add and subtract 16 in these brackets. So let's do that. -2 times x squared plus 8x plus 16 minus 16. Right? Because we're allowed to do that. We're allowed to add a 16 and subtract a 16. That isn't going to change the value of the equation, but this is going to help us to complete the square and get this into the format that we are searching for. Okay, now let's do the same thing for -4. -4 divided by 2 squared is equal to -2 squared, which is equal to 4. So over here, I'm going to add and subtract 4. So plus 4 minus 4, and that's all equal to 10. Okay, so my next step is for each of these, I'm going to take the first 3 terms and factor them in each of our brackets. And then whatever our final term is, whatever we subtracted when we had to add and subtract in order to keep the equations nice and balanced, we're going to remove from the brackets. And we're not just going to willy-nilly remove from the brackets. We will need to multiply it by that leading coefficient in order to let it be removed from the brackets. So let me show you what I mean here with an example. For this one here, I'm going to factor these 3 terms, and notice that they make a nice perfect triple. And if we've done everything correctly up to this point, they always should, right? We didn't just randomly pick 16 to add and subtract. We picked it strategically by dividing 8 by 2 and then squaring in order to make sure this would be the correct number so that we can always do this next step. Then this number here, that's separate, this -16, in order for it to leave the brackets and just be out on its own, it needs to be multiplied by -2. So I'm going to do that. So -2 times x plus 4 squared, right? If we recall that a squared plus b squared is equal to, a plus b in brackets squared is equal to a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. So therefore, these 3 terms here, x squared plus 8x plus 16, these just factor into x plus 4 squared. And then this -16 gets multiplied by -2, and that becomes plus 32, right? So the -16 became plus 32 in the next step when we removed it from our brackets. And in order to do that, we had to multiply it with that original leading coefficient so it could leave. Now I'm going to do the same thing again with the y term. So over here, I'm going to factor these first three terms. And if I do that, I'm going to get y minus 2 squared. And then this last term here, that's on the end, this -4, we must multiply it to positive 5 in order to let it leave the bracket. So this is going to become -20. And that's all equal to 10. Okay, so actually I have some good news, which is that all we really have to do now at this point is just kind of collect up some like terms and figure it out, and then that's pretty much it. So here we're going to have -2 times x plus 4 squared plus 5 times y minus 2 squared. The 32 and minus 20 can be combined to be plus 12, and that's equal to 10. And then I can just subtract 12 from both sides for my final step and get that this is going to be -2 times x plus 4 squared plus 5 times y minus 2 squared is equal to -2. And that is going to be our final answer. All right, so if you have any questions, please leave those down in the comment section, and we'll see you for the next one.